What are your likes and dislikes from leadership? What has been lacking in your career that made you come over here? Rather than me assume that one size fits all, or that I have to have it figured out, and I do have it figured out. Just some vulnerability that, like, look, I'm open, man, and I'm going to make mistakes, and I just want to be a better leader for you. So what do you think?
Every single individual has a story to tell, and they're great stories that need to be heard.
I want every listener to know they have the ability to change the world.
Welcome to the 1720 podcast.
What's up, Mountain Movers? Welcome back to the 1720 podcast. Just Stewie and I today, and we recently came up with a bunch of really good wisdom nuggets and rolled them out to a group of people a couple of weeks ago, and we just want to share our abundant wisdom with you all.
I didn't know you could pull it off. It's absolutely made up, but
yes.
I think real talk, I think our sort of talking points for today are just some awesome wisdom nuggets we grabbed from Mike Sarraille when he hung out with the EDP crew a couple, 3 weeks ago. I forget exactly how long it was, but he hung out with that group, and so we spent 4 or 5 hours just listening to him tell us awesome things about leadership, cool actual war stories, some book stories, just tons of really great stuff. And we were comparing notes afterwards. I think between the two of us, we took
all the notes.
All the notes. I was going to say like upwards of 20 pages worth of notes.
It was nonstop.
Yeah. And so anyway, despite what Kevin has suggested, we did not make up any of this.
Yeah. This is like 100% ripoff of Mike Sarraille. Man, what I was most surprised, not surprised about, but just appreciative of was that group of 34 people in the EDP, middle management to ownership, how engaged they were with one person standing up, telling a story and sharing wisdom and slides and stories, all that sort of stuff for 4 hours.
Yeah.
And everybody fully engaged. Like there wasn't scrolling on the phone, sleeping, none of that. He just had this way. I mean, first of all, he has the credentials to be up there that long, and it's one of those, man, you just should shut up and listen when somebody to that caliber is about to speak to us. And there was something like about his delivery where when he probably had like 50 feet to walk, and he would walk, but when he'd walk to your attention, he would lock eyes with you and stay locked for like 5 to 10 seconds. And so when you like the message just seeps in, and then when he walks away, you're still engaged because of that like 5 to 10 second eye lock. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, it happened to me. The first time it happened, I was like, "This is kind of awkward. I don't know what to do with my eyes." and then I was like, "Okay, no, he's doing all of those things, but that specifically because like he wants everybody to know, like I'm locked in, paying attention, I'm talking to you, man."
Yeah, and so quota. Matt Fisher, right front and center with him. And every time they would have an eye lock, I would look at both of them like it's a tug of war. Look at them. And they're just both wide-eyed at each other. Fish will know what we're talking about.
That is a quota to talk about fish. I feel like it's become like it's become a very common thing we do to shout out fish. Okay, so I think we walk through our my notes and your notes and try to pull out a couple things, just talking points. So you want to scatter shoot first? You want me to?
I'll go. The first one I have circled, just pulling from the too many notes, was he had a slide with Denis Rodman up on there, and I don't have the whole quote, but you might have a picture that's that slide. But essentially, Denis Rodman, when he was on the Bulls in the 90s, Phil Jackson was the head coach, and Denis Rodman was a wild child, but he was extremely talented at what he did, And there was a point where he went off to Vegas to party during the playoffs or something like that, and nobody could find him. They had to fly to go get him. And there's this funny story about it and crazy story in the Last Dance series with Michael Jordan. And basically Phil Jackson said every team can only afford to have one Denis Rodman.
Yeah.
Like a total nuisance, but he's so darn good at what he does that they put up with it. And I thought like just the quote-unquote Denis Rodman example, like that really hit home.
Okay, so that was actually one of the ones I pulled too. The note I made, and we can come back to this, I want to focus on what you said first. The note I made is, how do you identify who's your Denis Rodman? right? Who is so good that you can put up with it, and who is just a troublemaker or a nuisance that it's not worth putting. How do you identify who's Dennis Rodman? That was the note I made. But like, what are your thoughts around that idea? I mean, legit, not legit? Do you need a Dennis Rodman?
Man, I was really dissecting that. I currently do not have a Dennis Rodman, but I used to. And he was the most talented person I had met in the industry. But then there's a lot of stuff a lot of baggage that came in the way of it. And eventually our culture became stronger than that one person's talent. It overpowered it, right? Where as soon as that person was removed, the culture like leaped forward exponentially. So if they're not bringing Dennis Rodman, top 75 ever NBA type talent level, then it's probably toxic to your culture. And that highly skilled individual that you're keeping at your office, like you need to cut them loose.
Yeah, there's an interesting juxtaposition there between Dennis Rodman being so good that it didn't influence the culture, right? Because you see a lot of quotes on leadership quotes on culture about how your organization is shaped by like what you're willing to tolerate, or that sort of thing. And at some point, though, Dennis was so good that everyone appreciated it, and that's another interesting component to that, is that Phil appreciated it, but so did everybody else. They knew that you got so much upside between the lines with Dennis that it was worth putting up with him running to Vegas and marrying Carmen Electra and doing his hair crazy and like whatever nonsense he wanted to do.
Didn't he marry himself too?
I don't know if he married Madonna too at some point, didn't he? Yeah. But at some point it's worth it between the lines to have that crazy. But the culture didn't get chewed up by that. And I don't know if that was top down by Phil just saying, hey, y'all tap the brakes. Like, I know he's crazy, but he's too good for us to not have him. Or if the whole team had identified that, or exactly how that works. But it does seem like a very difficult balance to have in a high-performing team, because everybody else looks around and says, no more of that guy. And so I don't know how you evaluate it.
Yeah, if that person goes into a new position and goes, instead of being elite of elite, just becomes very good, out. Like, you would have to stay at that extreme elite level for it to even remotely make sense if you care about a positive culture. Okay,
so let's pivot off of Crazy Dennis. If you guys have a Dennis Rodman, you're trying to figure out how to manage a Dennis Rodman, et cetera, that maybe those thoughts are helpful, but it's interesting that Dennis Rodman idea jumped out to both of us. It was my number 2, but I'll flip back up to my number 1. One of the things we were talking about through the whole process, and Mike's book's called The Talent War, was talent acquisition. And a couple people raised their hand and asked some really great questions about how, Navy SEALs and whatnot, they all have the opportunity to select 10 from 1,000 candidates or whatever. And that's not necessarily the case either in the construction industry right now, or frankly in my world, in the legal world, where candidates are the numbers of candidates are low. It's difficult to find them, especially in terms of like finding someone who practices construction law. And so a couple people raised their hand and asked some questions. And the point I took away from that was working to find qualified candidates that are outside sort of your core group. Like, you don't need to go find another XYZ to build your widget. You need to go find another person who's a really great person, who has really great character, and bring them into your organization. And then you can work on teaching them to build your widget. I think we've probably said that a million times. I've said it at the office a million times after we read The Talent War and interviewed Sarraille. Hire for character, train for talent, or train for skill, right? Like we said that a million times. But thinking about it in terms of like going and finding someone outside of your, sort of normal search pool, I thought was a really interesting idea. Do you guys think about that at y'all's place?
Of course, man. Shoot. I don't know if you caught it, but that's today's daily motivation. Exactly what you just said. Which I think might have been a quote that he shared. I think that might have been one of my screenshots during his deal. But it's huge. Your talent pool, like if you're restricted in your industry, whatever your industry is, ours is construction, to hire people, like how broad of a net are you casting? Like, are you looking only for ironworkers or glazers or sprinkler fitters, plumbers, name it? Or are you just looking for great people? Like, when I look at this office, I have plenty of experienced people, and not not just one Denis Rodman knows all the things and can solve everything. It's between this group. If you put us in a room together, we will solve whatever issue you have when it comes to glazing. So that's the power of the group. So we don't need any more of that. We need to go create it. So character, what are you looking for? Is it grit? Is it drive? Is it a positive attitude? Does this person show a history of hard work ethic? Go find what's the picture perfect person, have those character traits, and apply it to whatever role you got in the company. That's copy and paste. This is the person we're looking for. By the way, here's the widget. Here's the role. It's secondary.
Yeah, I have two. Okay, so I went and pulled up the DM from today. I had forgotten. I read it this morning. I forgot it, but it's a Herb Keller quote. We'll hire someone with less experience, less education, less expertise than someone who has more of those things who has a rotten attitude. Because we can train people, we can teach them to lead, we can teach them how to provide customer service, but we can't change their DNA. That's awesome. I had forgotten to put that together this morning as we were recording. Two anonymous shout-outs to folks in the industry who are doing this, just to give you like examples of specifically how folks are executing on this. One of them was looking for someone for a sales role. I don't know if you were in this conversation or not, and I can't honestly recall who was telling it to me. I was looking for someone in a sales role, and they'd been, burning through Indeed and interviewing candidates from, recruiters and stuff like that. And then finally, they just decided to go to the mall and just like roll through a Gap and check out until they bumped into a few folks that they thought like engaged them in a really well in a way that was like really done well. And they were like, "Hey, have you ever thought about construction?" And just tried to pull like some sales associates out from the mall working retail. And I was like, you want to go find somebody outside the box? But there you go. Indeed's not going to bring that person to you because they don't understand that the job that you're offering is a career choice that can be made. And so it's a really interesting way someone shared with me to try to like pivot out of the traditional hiring model and find really great people and bring them into our industry. The other one's a similar example. There's a listener of the show I was talking to a couple days ago who was saying that they had a friend who was a coach and had been coaching high school football here in Texas for quite some time and just kind of burned out on the process. But they knew that he was in the process of teaching and growing leaders, building teams, communicating clearly, all those attributes that they needed for this job, for this role. And they said, "Hey, you want to make a career pivot and come over here?" And there you go. We're not talking about getting someone from drywall to go do glazing. We're not talking about a pivot like that. I'm talking about a real outside the box, go find someone who's not even in the industry or thinking about it and bring them over here to hang out with great people. So there's two really hardcore, not hardcore, but like hard examples of how to do it.
And the parlay to that, I love that this is intertwined with this message because that mall example, your first point, like not only do you serve your company and your direction, but you also, like if you have a purpose to impact lives, serve that too. Because that person on the other side of that is getting recognized for a good job. And I'm not saying a mall job is not a good job, but it might be a career path that launches them into a trajectory they didn't even think was possible because of their own self-limiting beliefs and doubts and the bubble that they live in. And somebody just out of the clear blue comes in and changes their life.
Yeah.
So, on both sides of the coin, it's a huge deal.
Yeah. Anyway, so there's a couple of examples on finding folks outside your core group, changing maybe your hiring practices, and in doing so, finding great folks with great character and training them to build your widget. All right, your turn.
Okay, so the last two that I have, the first one's looking at the leader. So what is a leader? And there's 7 points there. Inspires people to action. Sets the example for others to follow. Creates a culture of vulnerability. Creates more leaders. Willingness to make hard decisions and own them. Hold themselves and others accountable. And drives results. Like those 7, would you take that? Would you follow somebody that does those 7 things into war?
Yeah, for sure. Which one of those was the ones that jumped out most to you?
Creates a culture of vulnerability. You and I talked about this, I think, earlier this week, that I was going to have some upcoming first-time one-on-ones with some new hires. And then rather than figuring it out, because all my direct reports, we have a monthly one-on-one together just to talk about their journey and all that. So the kickoff one, I think I was mentioning this to you. I just opened the book and was like, look, I don't want to guess on the best way to lead you. I have some good ideas, but I want to keep it open. Like, what are your likes and dislikes from leadership? What has been lacking in your career that made you come over here that I could be servicing you with? And it led to some really cool conversations. And rather than me just have to, I don't want to say fake it, but like assume that one size fits all, or that I have to have it figured out, and I do have it figured out. Just some vulnerability that, like, look, I'm open, man, and I'm going to make mistakes, and I just want to be a better leader for you. So what do you think? Like, what would you like me to do? And let's go do that.
Yeah, so I was scrolling through trying to find that slide because I knew I had highlighted I think it was across 2 slides actually, but I had highlighted a couple of points that the ones that jumped out to me, and the one that jumped out to me was creates a culture of vulnerability to build trust and genuine relationships. That's exactly what you're doing in those meetings, right? Say, hey, I'm going to screw this up a lot. Sorry in advance. Tell me what you want, where are you going, how do you want to get there, all that stuff. I think in my industry in particular, perhaps in yours you can speak to this, we're guilty of this is the way. For those of you Mandalorian watchers, this is the way, and this is how you do it. And I believe that's especially for younger people in my industry, that's not the way to do it always. And they're saying, hey, I don't want that career path. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go that direction. I want to do it different. And it's not wrong, but the top down, I've been doing this for 40 years, 50 years mentality says, well, if you don't do it the way I did it, you did it wrong. And so it's an interesting set of conversations for me to have because I've sort of blocked the top-down mentality and just tried to wall the younger folks off from that to say, have those conversations you're having, which is tell me what the next 20 years looks like for you. I'm not going to tell you what it looks like for you. You tell me what it looks like for you. And then, one of the other leadership points was understands folks and help them make hard decisions. So sometimes you have to say, okay, that's not what you've. I understand why you've said what you said, but that's actually not going to work, or here's the problems with that, and hold people accountable to what trajectory looks like realistically. But people need, in order to be bought into their future and double down on their career path, they need to be a little bit in control of it. And so I think having that conversation is very helpful there.
Yeah, I think another one in that list that, at least in the construction space, we're behind the times on is the create more leaders aspect. You want to be at the top and have a bunch of minions do what you say, and everybody reports to you, and you're making all decisions. That's the Daniel's boat principle, right?
Yeah.
Why not find a bunch of people that are highly skilled in this and this and this, and then you provide whatever you can from a situational leadership standpoint and make them better, and just surround yourself with great people. I get to see our field doing that right now. Backing up to 6 years ago when we started this deal at Dynamic, the field was a weak point, man, because we didn't have the camaraderie. The culture wasn't alive yet. There wasn't the buy-in yet that we were actually different. And now that the industry is seeing, and the people within the glazing community are like, man, I heard they treat people right. So now we're getting like really good people. And now that monthly foreman's meeting, there are some assassins in it, man. And it's because our general superintendent, Pete, he is in the business of building people, not building buildings anymore. And he loves to say that often. And you're seeing the fruits of his labor because he's surrounded himself with just beasts.
Isn't that awesome?
It's so cool.
I don't understand how that is, or how a leader being someone who creates more leaders is a relatively new school perspective. And maybe it's not. Perhaps it's just in our industry is a little old school about it. But I don't want to be the top with minions. I want to have hundreds of more folks who are doing way more bigger things than I could ever imagine having done on my own by creating, building, and growing that team underneath me. Just like your what's his name, Pete? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Just like Pete's doing, man. I'm in the people business.
It's that, man. All that's rooted in ego and insecurity. Like not doing that. I don't want to be the answer guy for all everything. I don't have the capacity for it, and the team will be held back if everybody's waiting on my decisions. Truth.
Not directed at you, directed at that perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, people waiting on you. Boy, we're trying. Okay, is it back to me?
Back to you, sir.
Back to me. All right, I got 2 stories that Mike told that I thought were pretty good. One of them is actually about this guy Dan Gable. Do you remember that?
Refresh my memory.
It was the Olympian standing on the podium.
Oh, yeah.
Man, I actually went and found the picture that he had put on the slide. I didn't grab the slide like I planned on. Of this guy Dan Gable. If I don't know the whole story, so if I butcher it a little bit for purposes of getting to the point, my apologies in advance. But Dan was an sort of world-renowned Olympian in wrestling. And at the time of this photo was taken, well, let me back up. We're talking about this idea that perfection is an illusion, and everyone needs to be working and growing and challenging themselves to get better. And so Dan was the gold medal favorite, won the gold medal fairly handedly at the Olympics in, I can't remember. This was a picture from the 80s. You can just tell by the coloration of it, but I can't remember exactly when this was. And he's standing on the podium with his lips pursed, his brow furrowed, and his hands on his waist as they're preparing to play the national anthem to celebrate him winning a gold medal. And eventually reporters get a hold of him asking the question, like, yo, what's going on, right? Like, you seem terribly unhappy. And the position, or the idea that he espoused, I'll say in summary here, is he was just thinking at that time, while they were preparing to celebrate his victory in the Olympics, he was thinking, well, what's next? What did I do wrong? How do I make that better? Where's the space that I can grow? How did I, that sort of thing. And Mike said it in a very like SEAL team sounding approach, where he said, "What's the next ridge line?" And I wrote that down and circled it with a bubble, because I was like, what is the next ridge line? Okay, so you had a podium this week. Everybody had a podium this week. What is it? And did you celebrate it and think you made it? Or did you take that moment to stand and reflect like Dan is doing here and saying, okay, this is cool. They're going to play the anthem, but what's next? How do I do this better next time? How do I use this as an opportunity not to celebrate the victory? Which I'm not saying don't celebrate your victories. I'm saying don't let your victories be it, right?
Yeah, because
figure out how to
too
get
much
better.
Celebration can turn into complacency.
Yeah, right.
Because you're feeling yourself and you're feeling the victory, and you're letting that linger for a little bit too long, because that next loss is going to creep up behind you.
Yeah, for sure.
I kind of correlated that to when I was reflecting on that part. Did I give it my all? Like when the marathon in December, I gave that my all. I have zero regrets, because my body was falling apart, and I ran for as long as humanly possible those last 4 or 5 miles until both my hamstrings would shoot out, and then I'd have to go off to the side stretch just to make it the next quarter mile. There was no better for me. That was as much as I could possibly do. Mm-hmm. And that's one situation, but then take it to a day at work, take it to a workout, a set where I do 9 reps, and then if I cleared a bar, I'm like, you had a 10th, dude. What are you doing? You could be from as small as a set at the gym to a whole day at work to your marriage, so many different things. You can be doing better, guaranteed.
Yeah, there's a I was clicking around here trying to find it while you were talking, and I can't do it. I couldn't do it, rather. But Jake Thompson, I think one of his has tons of cool gear, by the way. Shout out to Jake again. But I think one of his T-shirts says something like "Winners don't waste reps." It's something to this effect. It's just you don't get to put in the half effort. Winners don't go in there and throw up 9 when they promise themselves they do 10. That sort of thing. Kind of to your point you're making.
Yep.
Another story around this idea of Dan Gable, it reminds me of a story that has stuck with me since 1991, I think. That's an old story I'm about to tell. But in short form, this story is my cousin, who was 6 years older than me, won a state basketball title in 1991. It was cool. We followed him around. His coach at the time was this guy named Charles Brydup, who is now the Dr. Charles Brydup, who's the director of the UIL, the University of Nebraska League, who manages youth sports, or high school sports, I should say, in Texas. And my cousin tells this story, which other people have recounted it. They're in the locker room, right? They're a bunch of 18-year-old, 17, 18-year-old boys who had just accomplished their life's greatest achievement. They won a title. They got the medals hung around their neck. They're in the locker room celebrating, and Coach Brydup stops them down in the middle of the celebration and says, "Guys, this is awesome. We're going to we're going to celebrate this. Like, we did it. Like, back in October when this started, this was our goal. We did it. Like, we're going to celebrate this. But don't let this be the highlight of your life. Don't let this be it. And I think a lot about that moment of him challenging those boys, because teams win state championships. They're awarded 6 titles were awarded 2 weeks ago. And not all those teams like pivot out to go on and do great things. And of those 12 guys on that team, like 9 of them went on to get their doctorate degree. There's like 4 doctor, that sort of thing. And I just think about Dr. Brydup a lot in terms of like the leadership of his like legitimate team at that time as a launching pad to send those kids off to go do great things. So don't let whatever that celebration was be the highlight, and be a little bit like Dan Gable, because when you get to stand on the podium, let's think about how you sharpen it up and do better next time. All right, so another story. Again, I will probably butcher it, but for the purposes of trying to get to the end point. But it's a story that Mike told about a guy named David Hackworth. But the gist of the story was I believe it was in Vietnam. There was a group that was a platoon, I think he called it, that was just having a ton of trouble. They were always getting shelled and losing a guy and just couldn't figure it out. And this guy Hackworth basically got sent in to solve the problem and sent in to like turn it all around, right? And so the gist of all of it was just one thing a day, just 1% a day, just a little bit better. And he effectively went into this encampment, and the guys were running around without their shirts on and not all sitting down to eat together, and just sort of like lots of organizational disarray. And so day one was just like, hey, man, we need to put our uniforms back on. And they were like, I'm sure they grumbled and thought the guy was crazy, but just put their uniforms back on. And they just did that for a little bit. And then the next day was like, all right, we're going to show up on time for chow. And then eventually, day by day by day, with a ton of time and a ton of dedication, that group got turned around, and then eventually got their moniker was changed from the hard luck crew to the hardcore crew. And so I just think about that in terms of implementing change, right? Because I think a lot of people want to go fast. They want to move the needle immediately. They want to step in. They want to operationally fix everything and change everything and blow up the old way we did it and all this. And sometimes I'm really guilty of that myself, honestly. But in this particular instance, just a thing per, and here I wrote one thing per day, but that's probably not realistic. Just a thing per month or per quarter, or just little tiny small tweaks, such that when they look back, they went from a group that was on the verge of being wiped out to a group that was pushing out and influencing the enemy on their terms all of a sudden. And so 1% per day, one thing per day. You see lots of chatter around this, but there's a story that Sarraille told about David Hackworth, and he wrote a book. I think it was an autobiography, and I didn't get the name of it, but it's on my list of listens at this juncture because I want to hear that story, as told by Hackworth.
Yeah, we see that a lot with our friends that take over businesses or get promoted and go into uncharted territory where you got to be patient. Like, that's one of my biggest weaknesses is like you go into a situation, just solve. Let's get all this stuff done. But just take your time, one step at a time, one thing at a time. Chalk up some small victories, gather the trust, get some excitement culturally, take it brick by brick, and it'll sit on a solid foundation. So that's whatever that book is, I'm sure it's solid.
I tried to find it. I can't even. Like, the Google is not even working, so if I find it between now and post date, I'll drop it in the show notes. Okay, back to you. Or was that it? I forget how many we had tagged here.
That's all, folks. Other than shout out to freaking Dr. Johnny Kim, Navy SEAL, Harvard doctor, and astronaut by the age of 34. So if you ever think you got it all figured out, just go find some other people.
What was the Johnny Kim story he told, too? Because wasn't it this idea that, like, he was kind of small and nobody thought he was going to make it, and was that Kim he was talking about?
Yes.
And they're like, wrong. He did all the things.
And then some.
Yeah. Yeah, that guy has a really cool, like, crazy, amazing story of doing stupid, awesome, amazing things.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the guy, like you said. He's the guy you look at and you're like, I'm standing still.
Yeah, exactly. And we need that. We need that in our lives. Yeah, man, just thanks again to Mike Sarraille and Talent War Group for coming in to speak to the TEXO EDP. Just, honored to be a part of that journey. And power in numbers. When you pay that membership, you get to get powerhouses like Sarraille to come in and speak to us for a few hours, and now we get to come and regurgitate it all to y'all, and just hopefully you picked up a nugget or two that you can implement in your life.
Shout out to the Talent War Group. Mike, we had a great couple of hours with them last week, and we'll see you guys next week. So until then, y'all get out there and move some mountains.